everyone. Welcome back to Accounting 210. We're going to continue with talking about how to apply costs or how to allocate costs to something that has been created in order to see how much you should sell it for to make sure you make a profit, because that's the reason we have businesses, to earn a profit, to employ people, to pay them a fair wage, to be a good citizen in our community, and then for the owner who has taken the risk to reap a profit for it. So in chapter 1, we talked about the different kind of costs: direct costs, indirect costs, manufacturing overhead. We talked about all those. So now I'm going to go back and give you a simplified idea of how we collect those costs and are able to allocate them then. So it's called job order costing. So I use bicycles. We're going to talk about we're creating 100 bicycles. How do we decide how much it costs us to build each bicycle? Therefore, we can decide how much our markup is, how much we're going to sell it for, and then what our profit's going to be. So managerial accounting, is looking to the future. We're budgeting, we're predicting. So there could be some changes as the year goes on. But managerial accounting is about that decision making and deciding how things are going to be handled. So let's start talking about job order costing systems and when they're used. First of all, when different products are produced each period. Okay, we've got bicycles, tricycles, and stride bikes, 3 different prices, 3 different price points, 3 different items. How are we going to decide how much each one costs? Products are manufactured to order. If you are a shipbuilder or a car builder or a winemaker, you have to decide how much it costs to make each product. There is a reason that a Lamborghini costs more than a Ford Escort. More expensive products go into it, more labor goes into it. So when a product is made to order, manufactured to order, you have to know how much it costs in order to know how much to sell it for. And when the unique nature of each order requires tracing or allocating costs to each job and maintaining cost records for each job. If you're a home builder, you have to keep track of how much wood and wiring and roofing and labor and concrete and plumbing goes into each house so that you can record it for that job and then get your money back plus profit from the home builder, from the person who's going to live in the home. All right, so I've covered some examples. Boeing aircraft. They keep track of how much goes into each airplane, each different kind of airplane, so that they know how much to charge our federal government for those airplanes or airline companies. Bechtel International, which builds large buildings, bridges, they do large scale construction, so they know exactly what goes into every job that they do. And Walt Disney, movies, they know how much every movie costs. One movie may cost a whole lot more than the other. Our ticket price at the movie studio is the same, but they know how much those movies cost them to make. All right. We've already talked about direct material and direct labor. That's the easy part. Easy part says we buy this material. We buy bicycle tires. This tire goes to this bike. This tire goes to this tricycle. This tire goes to a stride bike. And this tire goes to a really expensive bike. So we know that when we take one of these tires off the shelf, it's allocated to one of those bikes. Direct labor is also pretty easy because we know if we're running a good company, we know how much time it takes to put every component on every bike. So when we put this component, we take that tire off the shelf and we say it's going on this bike. We also know how much the direct labor is to go on that bike. Those are the easy parts. Manufacturing overhead, those indirect costs, are allocated to the different jobs, and they're traced in some way to each job. That's the one that we're going to learn in this chapter about how to allocate to all jobs rather than just directly trace to each job. Because we can't trace the electricity in the building per bike. We have to have a way to do it. So that's what this chapter is about, is deciding how your company is going to allocate those overhead costs. All right, this is what a job cost sheet looks like. Here we're making wooden cargo crates. We could be making bicycles, but we're going to make wooden cargo crates. And we're going to decide based on this what our direct materials are, our direct labor is, our manufacturing overhead, and then we're going to calculate the cost summary. And then at the end of the chapter, we're going to calculate the profit on this as well. So we start with direct materials, and we say that this wooden crate needs 12 feet of 2 by 4 is 12 feet long, we need 12. 1 by 6 is 12 feet long, we need 20. So we know that we need 32 pieces of lumber. There's our total cost. This packing crate, this cargo crate needs $116 worth of lumber at our cost. That's what we paid for it. That's what our inventory of lumber cost us for this packing crate. So we're able to put that on our cost sheet. Most companies fill out a cost sheet and determine how much this is going to cost them, so then they can tell the customer how much it's going to cost the customer. We can measure direct labor costs. So we know it takes 8 hours to build one crate. We've done this historically. We've practiced it. We've put it together. We know it takes 8 hours. We know our hourly pay rate is $15. So we know that it's going to cost $120 in direct labor to build this cargo crate. All right, so we go on next. So now we have the direct materials rate, $116. We have the direct labor rate of $120. And then we have to figure out how to allocate the manufacturing overhead. So we come up with a basis. We say some way to allocate that. So this company has chosen to allocate overhead costs based on hours of labor. Whether that's a good way to do it or not, each company has to decide for themselves. Some companies will decide to divide it by the number of machine hours. Some companies will decide to do it by the number of bicycle tires installed. But that gets a little different when you have a 3-wheel bike as opposed to a 2-wheel bike. So you have to make sure those allocations are fair. Okay, so we take our total overhead for manufacturing, and we figure out how to assign that total overhead to individual products. So we always use an allocation basis for 3 reasons. 1, when it's impossible or difficult to trace allocation costs to particular jobs. 2, when manufacturing overhead consists of many different items, from grease in a machine to dollies to production manager's salary, and also because many types of manufacturing overheads are fixed, even though output fluctuates during the period. So, first of all, the overhead may fluctuate, like utilities are usually more in the summer and winter than they are in the fall and spring, and output may fluctuate based on the time of the year. So we have to figure out a way to take all those expenses that are overhead, that aren't direct labor or material, and charge them. Manufacturing overhead is what I'm talking about. We have to figure out how to take all those expenses and allocate those to each item. So I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. So that we can charge a fair price, add a fair price for manufacturing overhead into the cost of each item. All right. So the predetermined overhead rate, POHR. Predetermined overhead rate. That's the number we're looking for is, oh, this is always fun when I try to figure out where my pen is. Right there, we're looking for the predetermined overhead rate. So we're going to take the total estimated overhead, oh, well, I missed that one a little bit. How about we do this? the estimated total manufacturing overhead costs for the coming period. So we're going to get into budgeting later, but the management have budgeted these costs for the total manufacturing overhead. And now we take whatever we've determined our allocation base is, and we divide it by that total number of units. In this situation, we're going to say it's allocated based on labor hours, direct labor hours. All right, you guys are going to have to calculate this later, but it isn't something that's super hard. You'll be able to figure this out. At first it looks really confusing, and then you just figure out that you fill in the numbers. So I want to go back to the allocation base. So ideally the allocation base is a cost driver that causes overhead. So I'm going to say like hours, each hour worked. So if we have a company that has $10,000 in manufacturing overhead, and we have employees who work a total of 1,000 hours, then and one employee hour builds one widget, whatever we're manufacturing. Then if we had 10,000 in manufacturing overhead, 1 hour goes to this out of 1,000 hours, then we know $10 of our manufacturing overhead are charged to that particular item. So let me walk through this just real quick. Let me see if I can find a marker that'll write a little better so we can see it. Oh, that's better. That's much better. So our manufacturing plant has $10,000 in manufacturing overhead. Now you know what manufacturing overhead is. We've already talked about manufacturing overhead. That's those costs like utilities, rent, insurance, the supervised salary that goes into manufacturing, but we can't allocate it as direct labor or direct materials. So we're going to say we made 1,000 bicycles. And for this sake, we're going to say that each bicycle takes 1 hour of labor. Just to simplify it for these numbers. So we said what our allocation is going to do is that we're going to base it on labor, because we know that it takes 1 hour of labor to make this bicycle. So we're going to allocate this overhead based on the hours of labor. So in this situation, if we have $10,000 in manufacturing overhead and we have 1,000 hours of labor, then we're going to divide that and say 10,000 divided by 1,000 equals $10 of manufacturing overhead goes into each bicycle. So we just have to, a company has to use their best guesstimate to allocate that money, and then the next year look at historical data and make sure that they've made really good allocation decisions. Most companies, their first year, will get some time allocation. They'll figure out how long it takes to do things by human labor or by machine labor, and that's how they decide to allocate their overhead. Now, I know you're saying, well, why can't they just say this is our total revenue and this is our expenses? Well, they could, but then how do they know if each individual item is profitable or not? So I'm okay if a company says, well, we make Stride bikes and we lose money on them because we know that in the future our research shows that people who learn to ride a bike on Stride bike instead of a tricycle will buy more expensive bikes in the future. So Stride bike is going to be our loss leader, but we know we're going to get, they're going to love our brand and they're going to buy more expensive, more profitable bikes in the future. Well, I'm fine if a company decides to use a loss leader like that they're willing to lose a little money right now in order to make it later. But they need to know that. So Walmart sells diapers for less than they pay for them. Baby diapers, Pampers, Loves. They lose money on them because they want young moms of infants coming into Walmart to buy the cheapest diapers in the world, because Walmart are cheaper than everywhere else. They take coupons, So a young mom comes in, buys the cheap diaper, use a coupon, buys diapers less expensive than she can anywhere in the world. But what does she do while she's there? She buys everything else she needs for her household. She buys her paper towels, she buys her groceries, she buys her baby food, she buys a piece of clothing, she buys a candy bar at the checkout line. So Walmart knows by leading with diapers and losing money on diapers, it's okay because maybe they just lose 30 cents a box. They make that up on all the other things they sell. Rarely does anyone run into Walmart, go all the way to the back of the store, buy a box of diapers, and not buy anything else. So it's the same with other companies. If they make something that loses money, as long as they know it and they want to do that, it's okay. They have to have other things that makes money. All right, here's how we apply manufacturing overhead. Here's the dollars. It's a four-step process. Don't get confused with the y equals a plus bx. This is not algebra. I promise you it's not algebra. So the predetermined overhead rate is computed before the period begins using a four-step process. So 1, we're going to estimate the total amount of the allocation base, the denominator that will be required for the next period's estimated level of production. So in our problem, our denominator was 1,000 hours of labor. Okay? The next thing we're going to do is they're going to estimate the total fixed manufacturing overhead costs for the coming period and the variable manufacturing cost per unit. So we said $10,000 was our total manufacturing overhead. So using the following equation to estimate the total amount of manufacturing overhead is Y is the estimated total amount of manufacturing overhead, that was 10,000, equals A, the estimated total fixed manufacturing overhead costs, right there. B, the estimated variable manufacturing overhead cost per unit of the allocation base, it's going to be $10, and the estimated total amount of the allocation base. Okay, that was real confusing. Scratch that. I'm going to go back and do it again. So let's compute the predetermined rate. Let's go here. I'm going to use their example, and then I'll use my example. All right. So they estimate that it will require 160,000 direct labor hours to meet the coming period's estimated production level. In addition, the company estimated total fixed manufacturing overhead at $200,000 and variable manufacturing overhead costs of $2.75 per direct labor hours. Okay, so Y equals A plus B times X. Y equals 200,000, which was the total fixed manufacturing overhead. In our problem, it was 10,000. Plus $2.75 of per direct labor hour. Ours was $1 times 160,000 direct labor hours. Ours was 1,000 direct labor hours. So if you take 200, which was the manufacturing overhead, plus $2.75 times 160,000 equals 440, plus 440, that equals 640,000. So we have 640,000 estimated total manufacturing overhead divided by 160,000 estimated direct labor hours. It equals $4 per direct labor hour. So in our situation, we had 10,000. Oh, me and my marker problems. $10,000 and our direct labor hours was 1,000, so hours equals $10 per unit. In Pear Company, it's $4 per labor hour. So it's really pretty easy to figure out and calculate. And in class, we're going to do some homework that calculates this out even more. And I think we really have to get our hands on it and do some calculations to figure out what it means. All right, so now we go back and we say the materials were $116, the direct labor was $120, and we're using those direct labor hours to calculate manufacturing overhead. We said our manufacturing overhead was $4 per allocation unit. Well, we said it's our hours, so 8 hours times 4 equals $32 for this crate is allocated to each crate. So if you see at the bottom, we now have 116 for direct labor, 116 for direct material, 120 for direct labor, and 32 for manufacturing overhead. So the total cost to build this cargo crate, just our cost, is $268. Unit product cost is then calculated at $134. Okay, so here's some problems that could happen if you inaccurately assign manufacturing costs to jobs that adversely influences planning and decision making. So before you make those estimates and those budgets and those allocations, as a manager, you have to make sure you have a good handle on what those costs are. When you're choosing an allocation basis, we used hours of labor on this. Sometimes you may use an hour on a machine. There's all kinds of ways depending on how you calculate and allocate direct costs, and then you take those numbers from a direct cost and base manufacturing overhead on that. It gets a lot easier. All right, we can multiply predetermined overhead rates. I'm not going to go into that. This is multiple predetermined overhead rates. We'll do a problem in class, but I think in class we have to get adjusted to the single allocation rates, and then we move on to maybe add another allocation rate to it. In this situation, they talk about assembly hours as one allocation rate and milling as another from two different departments. So we'll look at that, and I certainly want you to read this information, but I think that that's a problem we'll do in class rather than try to do it on a video. So one the other thing I want you to know, I'm going to go on to the end of this, that although we're doing all manufacturing here, because it makes it easy to understand, you have to understand that service companies use these numbers too. So an attorney's office charges you per hour. It's billed to you, but there's overhead costs, the cost of building, the cost of insurance, the cost of administrative staff, and that is probably broken out and allocated based on the billable hours of the attorney or the accountant that you're using. So as always, please feel free to call me, text me, email me if you have questions, and I'll look forward to seeing you in class. Have a good day.